think ready, right? Okay. We just say hello?
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Can you all hear us? Yeah, great. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. I'm David Martin. I'm the director of the Community Development Department. And we're here tonight to talk to you about the recently updated housing element and some implementation ordinances that have been adopted by City Council. And we've been getting a lot of questions over the last several months about how all these things work together, the new ordinances, the housing element, the state density bonus law, and how that's resulting in what I think we all agree are larger buildings than we're used to in Santa Monica. So we're just going to go over those updates and kind of have a just a overall introduction to all these questions, and then again, happy to answer questions that you might have after you hear the presentation. This really came about because City Council directed staff to hold these kind of meetings because they were also getting a lot of questions. This is a different environment than the city is used to. We, over the years, have had a pretty extensive process for approving and reviewing housing projects. And because of the new state law, that's really changed a lot. And so, again, we understand that people are, interested in what's happening, in some cases confused, and, have very legitimate questions. And so really the purpose of the meeting tonight is to try to answer those questions for you. So with that, I will hand it over to our planning manager, Jing Yo. She's going to take you through some of the slides.
Great, thank you, David. And I apologize for this format. We don't usually like town halls to be this formal, but it was the easiest for a live broadcast. I assure you that we have a brief presentation to go over, and then we will open up the floor at the podium. And if you have questions, this is really meant to be interactive, so you're not limited to like 3 minutes or anything like that. We can have a conversation. So there'll be plenty of time for that. Okay, hope this works. There we go. Okay, so and I just want to note up here with me is actually the rest of the housing element team, all the planners you see here, including myself. So Steve Mizukami, Carrie Fukui, Ross Fearman, and Rachel Kwok over there, and Roxanne Tanamori over in the front row. As David mentioned, the purpose tonight is to conduct really, an information session to explain the relationship between the city's affordable housing production program and state density bonus law, and basically how they're working together that are resulting in some of the the proposals for larger housing projects, that we're seeing that have been submitted to the city. So just by way of background, there have been there are tremendous state mandates on the city with respect to housing production. First and foremost, October 14th of last year, the sixth cycle housing element was certified by HCD, and that's as required by state law. And then earlier this spring, in March and April, the City Council, Santa Monica City Council, adopted the zoning changes implementing that housing element. Again, as required by state law, and those zoning changes became effective June 1 of this year. During the nearly 3-year course of preparing the housing element, there were numerous discussions with the City Council and the community about the affordable housing production program and also state density bonus law and how they work together. It was definitely a major subject of discussions. So we're going to start first with talking about the affordable housing production program, and starting with what is it? You might hear it referred to as the AHPP in short, and it was established in 1998. And what it is it's called an inclusionary housing ordinance, and what that means is that it requires developers of market rate housing in the city to provide a certain percentage of the project's units as affordable housing. So hence that term inclusionary, you including affordable units in a market rate project. Projects also have the option to pay an in lieu fee, but I'll get to that in a moment. Not all of them. There's sort of a limit, in the size of project that is allowed that minimum possibility. And in the certified housing element, the city has committed to maintaining the AHPP. So when does it apply? The AHPP applies to the construction of 2 or more dwelling units, not including ADUs or junior ADUs. And this table here shows, what does it require? So as I was talking about, it generally overall requires a percentage of units in a market rate project to be affordable, but there's also this option for an in lieu fee. And you can see there for projects of 2 to 5 units, there is that minimum requirement to pay an affordable housing fee. So that's like a per square foot fee. But, projects can opt to provide units on site as well. This is simply just the minimum requirement. When projects go above 5 units, so between 6 to 19 units, the requirement then becomes providing units either within the project on site in the project. And so in this 6 to 19 unit project, 15% of the units must be affordable. For up to 80% income households, this is sort of colloquially known as like low income households. And then for projects that are 20 units or more, which are kind of the vast majority of developments that we see, the requirement is 15% of those units to be affordable on site, and they must be evenly distributed across the 50% area median income, 80% area median income, and moderate. So across very low, and moderate income households. So those units must be affordable to those income levels, and there's corresponding rents that go with that. So that basically breaks down to like 5%, 5%, 5%. And the reason that split is in there is because the city's mandates from the state to plan for housing run across all income levels. It's not just one particular income level. So it's from very low, and moderate. 20 projects of 20 units or more also have the option to provide units off-site, but the percentage increases to 20%. Tonight we'll primarily be talking about that 15% requirement because that's really the vast majority of what we're seeing. So that's an overview of the Affordable Housing Production Program. So now let's talk about state density bonus law. So what is that? So state density bonus law, or I'll just call it tonight in short form SDBL because it's kind of a mouthful. So what it is, it's the state level version of the city's affordable housing production program. We need to recognize that although Santa Monica has had a local inclusionary housing program, for the last 25 years or so. There are many cities in California who have nothing like that. So state density bonus law provides basically, that inclusionary requirement, and the big difference is, as indicated in the name, developers can request a bonus under state law. So under SDBL, developers, they receive a development bonus basically in exchange. It's like a reward for providing affordable units in the project. And that bonus comes in the form of more market rate housing. So can the development bonus exceed a city's general plan and zoning? And the answer is yes. Yes, it can exceed general plan and zoning. So what you see in our local general plan and zoning, in terms of height or density, state density bonus law allows projects to go beyond that. Okay, that's an important point to understand. And state law requires that bonus be granted, so this is not a choice for the city to not grant that bonus, and we must grant that bonus even if it goes beyond a city's general plan and zoning maximum limits. So what projects are eligible for state density bonus? There are kind of like three hurdles, I guess, if you will, 3 thresholds that must be passed. One is the project must have at least 5 base units before the density bonus is applied. Number 2 is, does the project meet state density bonus law's replacement requirements? This only triggers in the event that they're actually replacing housing units, like they're removing existing housing units and building new ones. Not that typical because a lot of the development we see is in our commercial zone, so it's the removal of commercial, existing commercial and replace, with housing. does come up once in a while. And then number 3, does the project provide on-site affordable units for at least 55 years? So those affordable units in the project have to be deed restricted for at least 55 years. So they're guaranteed to be affordable for that time frame. What are the benefits beyond just a density bonus under state law? Developers can request what are called incentives, concessions, or waivers. And what that is basically is it allows relief from a city's zoning standards in terms of development standards and also potentially land use rules, which are the allowable uses. Requests for incentives, concessions, and waivers, they can only be denied under very limited circumstances as determined in state law. So what is an incentive or concession? What that is it allows the modification to local zoning standards in order to reduce the cost of providing the on-site affordable units. So just examples of that include additional floor area in a project or a different land use, that might be needed to support the affordable units in a project. And in this case, developers can request up to 4 incentives or concessions, depending on the percentage of the units provided. So there's a chart in state law that says, you provide X percentage of affordable units, you get, 1 incentive, 2 incentive, 3, 4. So that's how it corresponds in state law. The other potential modification to standards is a waiver. So what is a waiver? Waivers allow modifications to local standards if the applicant can demonstrate that applying the local standard would physically preclude the construction of the project, including the bonus units. And in this case, there is no limit to the number of waivers that can be requested. So it's unlimited in terms of the number of waivers that can be requested. An example of this would be building height. You can kind of picture why that might be. You have a project that is within an envelope, that includes the maximum density that's allowed on a site, and they get bonus units. And so they need additional building height to accommodate those bonus units, right? If they couldn't get that building height, then that would physically preclude the construction of a project. So next question would be, can an incentive, concession, or waiver be denied? Yes, it can technically. However, under state law and recent legal decisions that govern, they put arms around the city's discretion in this to the extent we have any. So with incentives and concessions, the city has to demonstrate that the incentive or concession would not result in cost reductions. So it's the city that has to demonstrate that. And that the city may request reasonable documentation, but we're very limited in the ability to require the information that's submitted by an applicant to support the request. So we cannot, for example, demand, economic data or what have you, that we don't have the ability to tell an applicant what to provide to us. They have to comply with state law in terms of what they give to us and meet that marker, but, we can't say, well, we need more and more and more, right? So, on the flip side, for waivers, the city cannot deny a waiver. If a development standard would prevent the construction of a project, including any density bonus and requested incentives and concessions. So that example I just provided of additional building height, if they're saying they need that to accommodate their bonus units, we cannot deny that waiver because they are guaranteed those bonus units. Remember what I said in the beginning, right? The city must grant that bonus. And then as confirmed by recent legal decisions and also HCD guidance through technical assistance letters that they issue to cities, in response to questions, the legal standard to deny is very high and it's very difficult to demonstrate. And the statute is very clear, about the city's lack of, choice around this. So what does an incentive, concession, or waiver request look like? This is just, we thought it'd be helpful to provide just an example of the kinds of requests, and what it looks like. So usually we get a diagram of some kind that shows, hey, in this case, this is a very common one that we're seeing around something called the daylight plane. So it's basically like a transition plane between commercial and residential zones. Basically, it requires that, at about 20 feet, the building step back at a 45-degree angle. So you kind of end up with this sort of thing. The idea is to allow sort of space between the development on the commercial property and the residential one. And again, this is a standard we see waived very, very often. And this is kind of how it's demonstrated. They'll show, like, for example, a pink plane here showing that is the standard. And if the project complied with it, it would result in the loss of X number of units, that are part of their bonus. So that's kind of how, these requests are being made. So this is just an example of one. And how much bonus can a housing project receive? So this is a table straight from state law, and it's Government Code 65915. If you're interested in which part of the state law it's from. So density bonus requires the city to grant the density based on the percentage of on-site affordable units. So you can see it ranges from a minimum of 5% very low income to 15% very low income. And then the density bonus ranges between 20% to 50%, depending on the percentage of affordable units that are provided in the project. We would note here that every year, it seems, state density bonus law gets amended by the legislature. So, come October or so of every year, the governor signs new bills, and we're reading them. And, we wanted to note, since we had the virtual town hall, actually, we've been looking through the laws, and there was one that affected state density bonus law, Assembly Bill 1287. We'd want to note it tonight just for full transparency that we are reviewing it and its impacts to state density bonus law and how the city implements that. How is the density bonus calculated? So the bonus is calculated from the base density of the project, which by definition means the maximum allowable density that's allowed under the local zoning ordinance. So basically, how many units can you fit, in an established building envelope? So that is before the bonus units added. So that's the distinction, right? There is what's called like a base project. So that's what is allowed by local zoning ordinance. And then you have what's called a bonus project, which is the project that includes the density bonus on top of the local maximum. The percentage of required on-site affordable units is calculated on that base project, not the total bonus project. And I will go through a visual example at the end of this that's kind of going to wrap all of this up. So here we are. So we've gone through now the state density bonus law. Now let's put them both together and talk about how they work. So by providing those on-site affordable units as required by the AHPP, market rate housing projects receive up to a 50% density bonus. So by complying with Santa Monica's affordable housing requirements, that 15% minimum on site, housing projects in Santa Monica qualify for up to a 50% density bonus. So that's like the merging of local law and state law together. And developers can request up to 3 incentives and concessions. So these are market rate projects and unlimited waivers. So that's a review of, what we just talked about in the previous section. So now this is an illustration of how it all works together. So we start with a hypothetical project of 100 units. So there is, a parcel that you could do a maximum of 100 units in that project. So that's the maximum allowable under local zoning rules. Then we apply the AHPP, right? In Santa Monica, it's that 15%. So we have 15 units in the project that are on site as affordable. And by providing those 15 units on site, the project qualifies for a bonus, a 50% bonus that is added to the project. So that adds 50 units. So now you have 150 units in this project. So 100 units is the base project, 150 units is the bonus project. And then in order to accommodate those bonus units, the developer requests incentives, concessions, or waivers to accommodate those bonus units. So for example, that could be building height and floor area. Makes sense, right? You need the height and you need the space to accommodate these bonus units. And that's why, we often get the question, why is there so few? Why does it seem like there's so few affordable units in the project? So you can see there, what was formerly 15 units out of 100 is now 15 units out of 150. So effectively 10% affordable, but it still complies with state law and local law because the affordable requirement is calculated on the base project. And that is what is required by state law. So that sort of explains, how kind of both of these laws work together to result in some of the proposals that we're seeing. So with that, I think that brings us to the conclusion, of our presentation here. I wanted to note some additional resources that are available. Tonight's presentation is actually already online because it's identical to what was given at last week's virtual meeting. We also have a guide, kind of like a overview, really just an overview of the presentation tonight. So we have it posted online on the Planning Resources website you see there. We also put a few copies at the back of the room in case you want something, a hard copy to take with you. I want to note that on the Planning Resources page, it's a new page, so it's a work in progress. We are working, coming soon, on putting up like pending project applications and plans. Right now, there's mostly focus on, there's like builder's remedy and approved projects, but we will be putting up pending applications and plans soon. And then also, you heard me reference technical assistance letters that come from the State Department of Housing and Community Development. What these are is that jurisdictions are allowed to reach out to HCD or applicants for that matter and request clarification on how state law is applied and what have you. And those are very instructive. If, they're posted on the internet and you can see that's the link there. They go to what's called the Accountability and Enforcement Unit, and they respond and provide guidance to cities. So that's also a link, and that is what provides guidance to how the city implements state law. So with that, like I said, that's the end of the presentation. We're now open for questions, comments, about anything, that we presented tonight, any questions you have about the housing developments in the city. I'm going to open the podium mic. Look at that. It worked. And I don't think we have a sign-in sheet. It's really just, if you have questions, please feel free to come on up. And like I said, there's no time limit. This is a conversation, so.
Yeah, my name is Patrick O'Rourke. I live in Santa Monica under CCSM. That's Community Corporation. The past of a volunteer of the Los Angeles Coalition to End Hunger and Homelessness. Mm-hmm. I sat on board meetings with Elena Pop, and I was a one-time president and member of the Hollywood Community Action Network. So I'm very familiar with some of the issues, but one issue that is not being spoken of when it comes to housing and building housing and setting priorities, one group of people that are being let down are those that have jobs, those that are being forced out for whatever reason through no fault of their own, and losing their job, losing their income, losing their ability to rent, and having an eviction notice. Anybody who's forced out of their unit has an eviction notice. Some slumlords, after the person moves out, they file a false eviction notice to punish the tenant or just to clear their own, whatever. And this follows them for 7 years. It becomes terminally impossible for that person to rent again for the next 7 years. This board needs to deal with that issue. When people were forced out before COVID over the summer, there were 2 articles about Ellis Act evictions. I talked to the city council member. I talked to the legal aid. I talked to even the representative that was over there at LA Night Out, where the firefighters and police show up. They said they have a fund, but they don't have no way to contact the people that were falsely evicted under the False Ellis Act. And this has to be addressed. If we can prevent people from losing their job. Now, I'm disabled. So this doesn't help me at all. This is not self-serving. This is an identified group that's not being served. If we can help these into it, fight any unlawful eviction that they may, illegal eviction that they may have received through hook or through crook by basically a landlord that just wanted to get more rent, then we can stop the process of them becoming long-term homeless. We can stop them from becoming dependent on the system and a burden because they already have a job. If we can put them in a shelter or a housing unit where they are protected, where they can pay rent, then they can get out of it within a month or two. Especially, we can eliminate that eviction.
If I could just clarify for you, so we're not a board or commission, we're staff members.
Yeah.
And we're actually here tonight because council directed us to talk about the housing program and the density bonus and all those kind of things. So we certainly appreciate your comments, but just wanted to clarify like who we are and what we're doing here tonight.
Yeah, but bringing this back to the group that basically I haven't been able to talk to for some time because of COVID and other things.
Yeah.
This is important. This group is being underserved and they're becoming a burden on the community. And in addition, if these people don't become long-term homeless, they don't encounter the other problems like drug use, among other things, because of terminal conditions, alcohol use or whatever else. They don't become a burden.
That makes sense. Thank you. We appreciate your comments.
Thank you. You have a wonderful day.
You too.
Hi, good evening. First of all, thank you for doing this. I feel somewhat responsible. Our neighborhood was really adamant that we wanted to understand and we wanted people to understand what you guys are up against. And I am disappointed there aren't more people here. I think everyone feels out of their depth. But we have a couple of questions from members, which I will put to you if you don't mind. And they're well considered, and I think they're relevant. Tough material here. So the first one is on page 5 of your town hall primer entitled Compounding Effect of AHPP and State Density Bonus Law on Housing Projects. The city notes that, quote, the state considers that requiring more than 15% the inclusionary rate of affordable housing for 80% or less AMI households as a condition to development of market rate housing as likely impairing economic feasibility for new housing development, end quote. Since Santa Monica's RENA mandate included a 50.2% inclusionary rate, the actual minimum number of total units would be at the 30,000 unit level. Density bonuses are reducing that effective number to 10%. The total unit number would be in the 44,700 range. 1, why are we not being told the true extent of the unit development burden being demanded of the city? And 2, why is city planning only using the unadjusted 8,895 units for water, infrastructure planning, and services cost planning purposes? It's a big question.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So I think your question actually is in relation to the housing element. And so the first part has to do with you mentioned the 15% on-site and why we're not analyzing the 30,000 or 44,000. And I think that math comes from kind of working backwards of like how many market rate units would be necessary to accommodate the affordable RENA targets.
Right.
Is that right? I just want to make sure I'm understanding.
The actual minimum number of total units would be at the 30,000 unit level.
Right. And to get to that number, you are backing out of, sorry, it's been a while. It's
The
6,000
50.2% inclusionary rate.
Yeah, based on 15%, you're sort of like 6,000 divided by 15%.
Right, a lot of numbers.
Yeah. So it's a great question. So the purpose of the housing element is to demonstrate that we have the zone capacity to accommodate the RENA, and I don't want to use words that people are not understanding. That the RENA means the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, and that is an allocation that is given by the state to each city. Basically, it's like, think about it like the fair share, of housing production that every city is responsible for across the state of California. And it went through an extensive process, to get to that point. And kind of long story short, I guess, like some of the factors that went into developing that RENA was, cities that were closest to jobs, transit, and affluent communities, really, cities that were high resource areas got higher shares of that RENA. So you'll see in the allocations, a lot of the coastal cities in California, particularly, Western Los Angeles County, Western Orange County, received higher allocations than, let's say, the Coachella Valley, or Eastern Riverside County.
But forgive me for interrupting you, but
Sure.
so the real question is, why are we not being told the true extent of the unit development burden being demanded of the city?
So I think
Public feels like we're not really getting, we understand your process, but we feel like we're not getting the true extent of the impact.
Well, I think number one is that the RENA is not a mandate to build, it's a mandate to plan, right? And so that, to get to that point, it's not only through the AHPP, it's also through 100% affordable housing projects, of which the city has committed to about 1,800 units on city-owned sites. And also we also self-fund housing projects on other sites. So we provide money to affordable housing providers to buy land, in the city and build housing in that manner as well. So, I think in the calculation you provided, there is an assumption that it's all coming from market rate housing, but there are actually other sources other than market rate housing to produce affordable housing.
And that's not really being articulated. That's just sort of part of your process internally.
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear that.
It's not really something that's been told to the community that we understand. It's difficult. I mean, clearly, there are not a lot of people who are willing to engage in this. You guys are professionals. But it feels as if there's information that's not fully fleshed out in the public, to the public, for those who do want to understand fully what's at play. And one of those, the second part of that question had to do with why is the city planning only using the unadjusted 9,000 units for water infrastructure planning services? Why does that make sense?
Why did you want to address that, Rachel?
Yeah. I could address that. So the 8,895 number is our RENA number. That's the number we're supposed to plan for. Now, if you look at our housing element, I realize this discussion is not focused around housing element, around our housing element, but in our housing element, you'll see that the state requires us to do a big buffer. And so I think we have a buffer of about 14,000 in our sites inventory. We had to identify enough land to support 14,000 units, which is above the 8,000 number, as I mentioned, of course. And this is because the state wants to make sure that if some sites fall off that inventory and no housing goes there, that we've identified another site to replace that. And so, that 14,000 number is a buffer. And so what you've seen in our urban water management plans and our infrastructure plans, we're really planning for 9,000 because that's what we're really meant to do, is the 9,000. The 14,000 that you see in our housing element is just a buffer, just in case sites fall off.
Okay, very good. One other member of our board has a question for you, which is, can you please explain what the waivers are for the current development at 2600 Wilshire? I know that Jing mentioned in the presentation that there was a chart, but it was not really provided. So what are the waivers for that project? That's in our neighborhood.
Fortunately,
We have all
Ross
of
is
you
the
here, which is
project
really
planner.
lucky.
So he could, I mean, I think we don't want this to devolve into just
Yeah,
about specific projects, but I think we're happy to address this particular question.
I don't have them all off the top of my head at the moment, but I know they are asking for relief from the daylight plane, I believe additional height.
Which was one of the illustrations that was
Correct.
used, right?
Additional FAR to accommodate the bonus. They are asking, so they're asking for a couple incentives and concessions as well as waivers. So one of the, I know you just asked for waivers, but one of the incentives was to add an ADU into the project that is deviating from the normal implementation of ADU state law.
And the city can allow that.
Essentially, yes, the state law allows any
Yeah,
requests to be asked for.
Yeah, and I think we do want to be very careful about talking one specific project because these projects are under review. But I think we can, I'm certainly happy to go back in the slides to like generally, I think if the question is about.
That's okay. I
Oh,
mean,
okay,
clearly
yeah.
our neighborhood was interested in. And I will let others ask, but many changes were made to the Santa Monica Municipal Code regarding the Affordable Housing Production Program on April 11th of this year. Most of those changes, perhaps all, seem to benefit developers. Is there a way to explain those changes and why our staff supported them or recommended them? The April 11th decision was an important one for the community to understand.
Yeah, I think so. If I can go back here. Sorry, I'm just, I'll bring this chart up.
Jing, if you want, I could start while you pull that up. So
Yeah.
one of the big changes
I'm just
that
bringing
we
this
made to the
menu.
HPP was, as compared to the former HPP, it was a menu option. So you could select, I provide 5% very low or 7.5% low. And it was like kind of choose your own adventure kind of menu. And we found that what developers were doing was they were choosing only one option only, which was the extremely very low income option, or extremely low income option. And so what we've done is an important part of why the HPP was changed is now we have this requirement where instead of they're picking one, selection of, income category, we're requiring them to be split among income categories. And that's in part to achieve our RHNA. So our RHNA, our Regional Housing Needs Allocation, has target goals for lower income, very low income, and moderate. And so to ensure that the city is achieving those income targets or those lower income targets, that's why we did the split. So that's a big change of what we did for the HPP.
And I think I would, this menu and, what developers are doing was choosing the lowest possible percentage. So actually what the changes did is actually increase the percentage. It went from a minimum of 10% or minimum of 5% actually to 15%. So, we actually required more, through the amendments and then, tried to actually have the AHPP, go towards serving, meeting the RHNA targets. So, hence the split between all of the income levels as opposed to just one percentage for one level, for the kinds of projects that we were seeing.
Okay, and one last question. Thank you very much for helping with this. One last question. It seems the city staff, and I would say even personally, I would say the city council have been somewhat fearful in their relationship with the State Housing Community and Development Agency in terms of the power that the state wields. And people are concerned that we are operating out of that rather than strength. There are other cities that are challenging the state. We are not. It doesn't mean that that's a bad move. It's just that this impression is that we are fearful in our engagement here. And just wondering how you would respond to that.
Well, I won't comment on whether we're fearful or not, but I'll just kind of state what the facts are, which is, there are pretty one of which we're already well aware of, builder's remedy, right? That is, we've seen, what those projects can be. The state has the ability to fine the city, for being out of compliance. And we've seen multiple examples of that with cities that have fallen out of compliance in their housing element. So we do have, I think in terms of our dealings with the state, I don't think it's a matter of, who holds what have you. It's just that changes that the legislature have made over the years is, it's very clear that the state has declared this housing crisis and they've given HCD, the tools to be an enforcement authority and a very meaningful one. This particular six-cycle housing element was very different than prior ones because it wasn't just this kind of like exercise. There was more meaning put into it, and there were penalties, associated with noncompliance. As we now know. In our dealings with it.
I think a lot of residents feel that Santa Monica is exceptional in terms of our production of affordable housing.
Yeah.
And so we should feel to be in a powerful position rather than a fearful one in relationship to the state. Otherwise, why have we done all this good work to produce affordable housing? And I think, clearly everyone's glad that we've recovered from the builder's remedy to whatever extent we have. But I think there's this sense that other cities are approaching all of this from a different point of view. And is it because the value of the land here is so high that the pressures from the developers to produce here is so much greater than in other parts of the state? It's just hard to understand why our city has taken such a hit.
Yeah, and sorry.
Just one thing I think that we should point out is that while you're certainly correct, other cities have, challenged the state and, not implemented their housing elements. We track those things and we don't know of another city that's actually been successful at, avoiding these issues. So, yeah, they could kind of go down a path and try to block it, but they haven't been successful. Our city council has, made the decision to, accept what the state is requiring and to plan for that as best we can. And that has to do with complying with the loose, keeping the density in the commercial areas along the transit boulevards, where I think one of the things that is good is we've been successful at not having to increase density in the residential neighborhoods. So we've tried to be really thoughtful about how we've done this. But I think if there was a feeling that we could have been successful at challenging, that might have been a different conversation and a different outcome. But it doesn't, based on legal advice and everything we see around us, it doesn't seem like that's the way we should go.
So my personal question is that my last question from our board and our members comes from me, and that is that I know that I heard Jane did a very good job with the virtual meeting, and thank you for that. A lot more people were able to attend, but one of the comments that you made, which makes people feel reassured, is that what you've done is tried to minimize the impact on the residential neighborhoods, and we are grateful for that. But one of the concerns is that SB 9 allows development in the neighborhoods, and the cities have no choice about that. It allows multiple units on a single family. Challenging SB 9, and I know you are not the city council, but and I'm not going to ask you to commit one way or another, but we are curious to know whether or not or consider, given the commitment to protect the single-family neighborhoods.
All I can say is we've received no direction from the city council to look at that. So,
And I would also note that there's a lot of cities are proposing a lot of challenges to HCD. We have not known, very successful ones at all. But HCD is not just here for the cities, it's also here for the public. So if you do have questions and concerns about how state laws interpreted, they're also open to receiving, technical assistance letters, they call them. I think on the last slide, Jing, if you want to pull up, there are a lot of technical assistance letters posted online.
Right.
It's not just for cities, it's also for members of the public. If they have a specific question about how state law is interpreted, they're always happy to help, and they provide their email addresses online as well.
I think it's also worth letting people know that there's an organization called Our Neighborhood Voices, which is trying to mount an initiative for the next ballot that would restore local control to cities. And we certainly wish for you guys to have more control. So thank you very much.
Thank you for coming tonight.
Hi, everybody. Ruth Ann Lara. I'm following in Tricia's wake, and I'm actually on the board of Northeast Neighbors, so perhaps it's appropriate. And my question has to do with the percentage of affordable that's required. I know Santa Monica has always championed affordable housing production. And 15% is the state requirement. Is that where that comes from, or is that a city decision?
15% is a local requirement. State density bonus laws minimum, like there's all different kinds of projects that could qualify, but the least amount is 5%.
Okay. I guess my question concerns whether or not there's discretion to increase that percentage locally as a local decision, because we're a very strong housing market and we're seeing a lot of housing production coming online. And because it's really about affordable housing, we're going to get a lot of market rate housing. And how do we up the units produced for affordable? And my question is, could you have the discretion to consider increasing that percentage? Because with the density bonus, you dilute the amount of affordable proportionally, obviously, in the project. And so I just present that for your consideration. That's something that would be, I think, worthwhile to consider.
So I think one of the things, and I think I touched on it in the presentation, and it's also on page 5 of the primer that we put on the website, and what Tricia referenced is that state law does presume that any setting of an affordable housing percentage above 15% is presumed to be, potentially affecting the economic feasibility of a project. And so under state law, if a city does propose more than 15%, HCD has the right to review how you reach that conclusion, review your feasibility analyses, and potentially challenge, that setting of that percentage, right? And I think just to give you some background, like the upzoning that happened in the commercial areas over the spring, that was implementation of the housing element. Those densities were related back to the percentage of affordable that was required in the project. We were required to demonstrate that, like, we're not just setting a percentage and then just choosing a number out of thin air. We had to demonstrate that there was a relationship between them, that it was feasible, that the FARs that the densities that are proposed were feasible to support 15%. And really the way it works is, the more you increase that affordable percentage, the higher the allowable density has to be at a local level. Just, keeping that in mind, and then density bonus gets added on top of that, right? So it's not like you can just increase, the affordable percentage and keep the local maximum the same.
Okay.
Right.
Complicated. Thank you. And this was a great presentation. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you.
Hi.
Hi there.
I'm Heidi Jo Corey, and thank you again for doing another presentation. I was there Monday, and you did a fabulous job again tonight, and I learned a lot, and I'm so confused at the same time. And I guess I'm overwhelmed because I live on Wilshire Boulevard in a 100-year-old Spanish house that would be in the shadows of the 2501 project. I live across the street from Douglas Park. And in 2019, I watched a Zoom for the 2501 project and the 2600 project. And the 2600 was 3-story, and the 2501 was 4 stories, 70 units. And then August 30th, I open up the mailbox and get this flyer saying it goes to 8 stories and 170. And it was like a soccer punch. I don't understand. And I was so surprised that my Santa Monica didn't tell me. Like, I learned from the builders, and it was my neighbors up on California didn't even get the flyer. So that's why I'm so sad that a lot of people aren't here, because I walk my dog and people don't even know, who live a block from me, that this is happening. And I doing tummy. There's going to have to be a signal light on this street. How are we going to have a Gelson's Market? And you just made all these friendly roads on Wilshire Boulevard. And how are all these buildings going to hold this? And I think I'm just really frustrated and sad, because I don't even know I could live here anymore. I've lived here for 25 years on the same block. And I mean, I called Phil Brock, and I'm like just driving him crazy, but I'm like, what happened? What happened? It was 4 stories. And he's like, I just saw that it was 4 stories. He seemed surprised to me. He didn't know. And I want to say, Santa Monica, what can I do? Because people are just saying, oh, there's nothing we can do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I hear your concern, your frustration, truly empathize with it, and I think this is different. This is a different, world we're in now, where this is truly a loss of local control. This is, this diagram explains exactly why that project got bigger. That's how, that happened. And it's allowed, we are required to, allow it. There's not a choice, for the city to say, no, you can't have that bonus. That's, the housing projects we're seeing now, that are maybe a resubmittal, right, of projects that you may have seen in the past. They are allowed to request it, because state law allows it. It allows the change, and, you have, and what we can do in terms of, as a local jurisdiction, is to try and get as much affordable housing as we can in there, so that's the 15%, on site. But, really, when it comes to housing, the state really has taken control, in many, many ways, so it's not just Santa Monica that's experiencing this, it's every city in California, right, is going through this process at the moment. And, one of the things, Santa Monica is a very desirable place to live, right? There's more people that want to live here than there are available spaces.
And yet there's so many vacancies.
Yeah.
I mean, I walked down 3rd Street Promenade on a Friday night at 8:00 and it was dead. Mm-hmm. You go up on Montana and the shops there are vacancies. I don't understand why that isn't developed. Mm. It's like, when is enough? I mean, my question is, how in 2019 did we see the renderings and drawings of a 4-story building with 70 units turn into a double? Because it was 9,000 back then, extra. How did that happen? Mm. That's my question.
Yeah, it's really the effects, again, of, state density bonus law. And, by providing the on-site units, right, they're granted that bonus, and mm-hmm. then the relief to development standards to accommodate that bonus. So, as I said in the slide before, right, when the city's required to grant that bonus, and we must grant it even if it exceeds our zoning rules. Mm-hmm. So that's, nowhere in our zoning code does it say, 8 stories and whatever. It doesn't say that, right? But the combination of state density bonus law on top of local zoning is what allows, that project to be proposed.
And I do get that a lot of people want to live in Santa Monica, and I would love that my son who went to Franklin, that his tutor could live and the teachers could live in Santa Monica. But I don't think these 8-story buildings with 1 unit all the way up and down the street are going to be filled. I mean, if you drive down Lincoln, it's like a ghost town, like all these buildings. And somebody had mentioned about vacancy tax, and you said, no, we don't have that at the moment. And I was wondering if you could explain, what is a vacancy tax? Does that mean if these builders buy this monstrosity, build, and then half their building's empty?
No, I mean, it's a tool that cities have used, and it's really to try and bring vacant units back onto the rental market. Typically, we see it in areas where there's maybe a lot of second home ownership. That's, happens in a lot of cities, coastal cities in particular, might see higher incidence of that. And so you'll have someone who maybe lives in like Chicago, most of the year, and they come to Santa Monica twice a year. And the idea is, that to not have people or investors just buying property and leaving it vacant, for whatever reason, it's to make sure that every housing unit, that's available to be rented is rented. And if you don't do it, then there's a hefty tax that's paid. I'm aware, I mean, there's other examples. I'm aware like the city of Vancouver, Canada, they do that, where there's a ton of like foreign investment, into housing there. And it sort of is intended to make it very expensive, to own second and third homes and to ensure that, housing actually is for people who are living, in that city.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I just wish I had more hope, but yeah.
Thank you.
I too was at the Zoom, so thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you for coming to both sessions.
Yes, no. I'm just trying to get a grasp on everything. And just to sort of add to the vacancy tax, because I think I was the person who asked that on the Zoom. In New York City, for instance, they implemented a vacancy tax. At first, they did it with commercial buildings, because the problem with the developers is they want the maximum amount of money they can possibly make on a unit. So especially in New York City, where it's so volatile, they would leave it empty for long periods of time in hopes that once the market improved, they would be able to rent at a much higher price. And they don't, and they could take a tax loss on it, on whatever the empty building, which I think, that's a huger problem about our tax laws in general. But so the idea of the vacancy tax is second homes and these large buildings would not remain empty, waiting in which they could charge a tenant much more than they could at a particular time. Like they wouldn't, the market, they would wait out the market essentially, which I guess, which will bring me to my question, which I don't know that this is something that you can address, but since it's not a development question, it's more once these units are developed, how do you deal with transparency? For instance, knowing how many empty units there are. And it seems to me part of the point of density housing in California should be to make more housing affordable in general, as opposed to, we call it market rate, but it's really affordable housing and unaffordable housing. So one of the things I look on some of these sites, you have to call to find out what the affordable housing rates are, which I do understand. Probably the reason they do that is they don't want to list the affordable housing price, because then it will put off people they want to charge a much larger market price. So is there something that the city council can do, or is there something, I don't know, this is a genuine question, to make sure that these developers have to be transparent about how many units are empty and how much they're charging overall?
So is the question about the affordable units in their project?
Affordable units in their projects, and then also their market units, because I think ideally what you would want with the density is to bring the market price down.
Yeah,
not for the developers, but for the rest of us.
So I can speak to the units that are required to be deed restricted. So remember, I said if you have to provide an affordable unit in your market rate project, you're required by the city to deed restrict those units for 55 years. What that means is that they have to sign an agreement that says, I swear I will keep this, like not just swear, it is. All those units to be rented to an income qualified household for 55 years. And those income and rent limits are published by the city. They're established by the state, and they're on the website. And in order to occupy those affordable units, they must go through the city's below market waiting list. So it's not the choice of the developer to choose whomever they want to occupy those units. It must be someone who applies through the city's open process to get on that waiting list, and then the occupants of those affordable units are selected from the city's list.
And what is the process for that selection in terms of, so the developer has nothing to do with the selection?
They do not, yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah, they don't, yeah. Okay. Yeah, they're just, they have the units, and then in order to fill those units, they have to go through, they basically go to the city, and the city refers like tenants over who go through a process. We're not the housing division, so I can't give you all of the nuts and bolts about how all that works, but, they do have to come from the city list.
Okay.
Yeah.
And would the housing division be the one who, or would it be the Santa Monica City Council who would make a determination of sort of demanding transparency from developers of vacancies?
How many units are available and what have you.
Like that for these, we've had.
So I believe, I thought there was council direction to look at like creating a rental registry of non-rent controlled units, wasn't it? So we do have, like for all the rent controlled units in the city, of which those are ones that were, right. Right, so we know what those are, and.
Yeah, I can, it's great. I can look up.
Those are controlled by the rent control board. So there have been discussions by the council to create like a required registry, just so, I think it was more like for information, because we really don't have information about units that are not rent controlled, like how much they rent for, we know generally like the mix of the units through the census data and what have you. Like we know, how many 1s and 2 bedrooms and what have you are in the city. We do not have any information about what they rent for, nor do we know who's occupying them. So that was something that has been discussed at council. Yeah.
Okay.
That was pretty recently, so it's not something we would have anytime soon. but I know council's talking about it.
About it, that's great. And I mean, which I guess is another question, and I assume that would be through the council or through the rent control board, is also seems the idea that the only things that are rent stabilized or rent controlled in any manner is before 1978.
Yes.
I mean, that's almost my entire lifetime. That's a law. I mean, I understand developers have to make money. I do understand, but at the same time, at what point do we change that to make it slightly more recent so that renters can live someplace and not get kicked out because they.
Yeah. So your question is like, is there anything that could make more units rent controlled?
Yeah.
So we're really up against state law on that. There's something called Costa-Hawkins that basically does not allow newly constructed units to be rent controlled, so that's why it's like anything before 1978. I'm aware there's something called the Justice for Renters Act that qualified for the next ballot, that is intended to be a repeal of Costa-Hawkins that would bring control back to cities to, look at that issue again in terms of adding more units to rent control. That's
great.
And just to add to, not about adding more rent control units, but a huge reason why we didn't upzone the multi-unit residential districts was because so much of our rent control housing are within those districts. And so we wanted to protect those districts, and hence why we didn't upzone, those districts, because we wanted to preserve them and make sure that our rent control supply is protected. So there's that. Number two, there's also state law, which says that if you remove a rent controlled unit, you have to replace it. So there's that as well. So there's just two kind of levels of protection that there is for rent controlled units, such that hopefully our supply of rent control units are stable.
Base maintained. Now, when you say that you have to replace a rent-controlled unit, does that, like, for instance, the unit next to us looks like it's in the process of being demolished? I have no idea what's going on with it, to be honest. But if they demolish that and rebuild, would it still have to maintain its rent-controlled status?
If the replacement project is a residential project, they have to replace that rent-controlled unit. There is a loophole in state law that says if you're building a commercial project, you don't have to replace it, which is a silly loophole in my view, but that's the way that's the way state law works.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much. Greatly appreciate all of this.
Thank you.
Hi, Stacy Dalgleish from Mid-City. I understand that once you've qualified for a low-income unit, that there's no ongoing corroboration that you continue to qualify for that. Are you aware of what the procedure is to make sure that those units continue to be filled with people who are low income and therefore qualify for the unit?
You know, I don't want to misspeak on this. So I don't know if there's like an annual income verification.
My understanding is that there isn't, and that seems to be a real problem. I know that, for example, in Mid-City, we supported a transitional age youth building, and that was great. But one of the things that we discovered was that you can qualify as a transitional age youth, meaning up to 25, but then you go over 25, and there's nothing that happens. Once that you're in that unit, you can stay in that unit, which on one hand, I don't want people to then be moved out of a unit, but it then takes up a unit that was meant to be foster care.
Yeah.
Primarily.
I think that's probably like better as an illustration of just kind of the housing problem, we have, right? If someone initially moves into the unit and it helps them, because they're low income, they qualify for it, but over the course of that, it actually helps them get a stable job, potentially make more money. That's all a good thing, and how they then evolve out of that into something else. I think unit.
Yeah, you would only be following up with me. I understand, and I would love to know that I'm wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I
if
do.
People are transitioning, they get into that unit, and then that enables them to get gainful employment, and so their income increases. That's wonderful. In New York, the way that that's handled is that every year you have to provide your tax returns, and then your percentage may stay the same, but because your percentage is of a larger income amount, then your rent increases. There are problems with that too, of course. I mean, if our goal really is to provide housing for people, to provide affordable housing for people who need it, then we have to have a way of moving people out. Otherwise, it doesn't serve the purpose ultimately. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I can actually answer a question.
Sure, please come on up.
In my CCSM unit, all the tenants there receive an inquiry every year to verify that they still qualify for low-income housing. Now, I'm not sure about those on foster care. It may be a different process. But every year I have to provide a financial statement, which is basically a sworn statement, provide my bank account number, say whether I have assets, and if I lie, I can be. So there's that. But as far as foster care, it would work if you modified the program to have available units that were the tenants from those foster care units have availability so then that they can transfer to open up those units for further foster care. That might be a plan or a way how to modify the way how the program works so then that they can transition from being located in what obviously would be a smaller unit, wouldn't serve their purposes as in a growing income, and keep those units as low-income units. Have basically or basically a system to find another unit. Well, one other thing, when I was with the Hollywood Community Action Network, we found, this was in the, late 90s, that one out of every block, there was a vacant building property or a vacant building, basically just sitting there unused, unrented. If the city did create a registry of low-income units, they could also verify whether or not if these units were still being rented to low-income tenants, or if the landlord was defrauding the city by initially offering it and then saying a family moves out and they just rent it and don't tell the city and don't tell the tenant that these are actually supposed to be low-income units, but rented at a higher cost. Verification would be in compliance with the city mandate.
Yeah, the housing division does monitor the compliance with those deed restrictions every year. So that is done.
Well, there was a problem. Pre-COVID, at least 2 buildings, maybe up to 5, were vacated due to, they said they Ellis acted it. And when the city found out, instead of, the only punishment was starting to collect, their fees, because they weren't low-income units. They were supposed to be sold. They were supposed to be sold to tenants. That was fraud. And the only punishment to this or these landlords was that they collected the fees. There was no real incentive not to do it. In addition, I remember around that same time, there were 3 buildings, and they all had luxury units. Instead of having low-income units, it had luxury units all the way throughout. They altered it in the building process. There was no confirmation by the city, and they were allowed to reduce the number of units available on all 3 properties by shifting a few of the units, all the units in this one building, which was the upper income units, to another building. And there was an outcry. It appeared in the Santa Monica Daily Press. I remember reading about it. And it basically shows the city has to follow it. That means the developers have to follow it too. And compliance should be the focus, especially on landlords or developers that are known to have made mistakes, maybe, Yeah. I say that tongue in cheek because we all know how this works.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the comment. Yeah. And I don't want to get the impression, or you to have the impression, that it's not checked. It is. I can't speak to what's happened in the past, but I know that there is an annual audit of deed restricted units, to ensure that developers are still complying with the terms of that deed restriction. I can't speak to what happened in the past, but I know that is the requirement now.
Well, from what I understand, there was no notification to the tenants. The only time when they found out when they did their annual review or something, and it was by happenstance. They weren't even going to do these units because they were supposed to be sold. But 1 or 2 tenants came forward and say, "Hey, wait a minute, I'm renting. I don't live here. Why am I?"
Developer could actually longer allowed. So that's one really big change, The annual monitoring is something that is required.
Okay, now, there was one other thing. I helped my former girlfriend move out of her mother's house who had passed away. That she was there for like 30 years. Never found out if it was re-rented or as low income, or if it was under what do you call it, under the control. Basically, it was rented as low unit. It was supposed to be stay that way. I'm not sure if it ever stole. Renters there on that property, so I'm not sure. And not all the units are rented. It's a mix of renters and owners. So I see only one other problem. A landlord decides to take a unit off. He basically turns it into, what do you call it? From the, what's that called when it's been on the market for a long time as a low income and it's not supposed to until that person dies or moves out? What's that called?
A life estate?
No, where it's basically factored in that it's a low income unit.
The deed restricted unit?
No, not fee restricted. There's a whole, like 1972 was the
Like
year when.
Rent control?
Yeah, rent control. As a rent controlled unit, and then the person moves out, what's to keep a landlord from, say, taking a unit off the market, turning another unit into rent control, but now he can charge much higher rent because the rent control now would be higher than what he was receiving for that unit. In other words, gaming the system.
So by law, they are allowed to do that. That's Costa Hawkins.
I see that as gaming the system, though, that they could potentially see that as a loophole that, oh, I could take this unit off. It's extremely low income, because it's what do you call it, rent controlled.
Yeah.
And if I take that one off, I'll just put this one on in another building that I'm not, that I don't care about. But because the rent control starts from then, it would be higher, much higher than he would get from both units otherwise.
Right. Yeah.
I see it as a way to game the system, and that we have to watch out for this.
Yeah. And the city has a very long history of, establishing very strong tenant protections. We do multiple annual workshops on tenant and landlord rights and responsibilities. The rent control board monitors, and anyone, if they're feeling like they're in that situation where they're being forced out of that unit, the rent control board is available. The city has a consumer protection unit. Forces, we also offer, there's a so that the legal counsel throughout that about tenant protections and protection and preservation of rent control units. That's been one of the major values of Santa Monica for decades. So I appreciate definitely everything that you're sharing. And
I do know that none of the tenants in those two Ellis acted buildings have been contacted. Even though I even told the lieutenant and the city council member that all you have to do, how do we contact them? Well, you can post inside of the homeless task force, like SOVA down there in middle over there on Robertson and Pico. You can post it in CCSM. If you were a tenant of this unit, please contact the city attorney's office.
certainly. I think I see someone waiting behind. I want to make sure everybody has a chance for their questions. Thank you.
There's a few more solutions that can be thought out.
Great, thanks.
Jennifer Erickson, thank you so much. Quick question about state density bonus law.
Yeah, can you speak into the microphone just a little closer?
Yes,
Yeah,
sorry.
thank you.
Is that better? In terms of waivers, is those limits something that's available?
I guess it depends. So you're asking about a waiver of maximum, like parking maximums? So they want to build more parking than they would be allowed. I think that'd be more of an incentive.
Just to
potentially.
define what a waiver is a like you would waive a standard that physically precludes you from building the project. In that case, if you're trying to exceed the parking maximum, it's less of a waiver and more of a incentive concession. You might want more parking because it makes the project more financially feasible. So the difference between, just so everybody knows, as Jing went through the slide, incentive and concession, it's about cost. So if it makes a project more cost effective, a developer could certainly propose up to 3 to 4 if it's an affordable housing project, but they could request up to 3 incentive concessions to reduce the cost of their project. And they get unlimited waivers if they think the standard physically precludes them from building that project. So that's the difference.
Okay. But there's no need to show like economic feasibility.
I think what we're allowed to ask for under state law is limited. I mean, we could ask for justification, but in terms of, and Jing can elaborate on this, in terms of like financial pro formas, we are not allowed to ask for that kind of thing. We can ask for reasonable documentation is what they say.
And an applicant can voluntarily provide it, but we can't demand, that they, show us your pro forma sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay. And then I had a question about calculating base density for the areas that aren't subject to the unit per acre.
The units
area.
per acre.
Right. In the packet for this meeting, there were some examples on the back of calculating the base density for those properties, and it's and the average area per unit, rather than how much would be permitted without, necessarily a proposed number of units. So, is that the case that it's sort of you calculate it backwards, or?
It's a little bit of a reverse. So I do want to emphasize, like the example that's shown there is an example. Under state law, basically it says an applicant can submit a base density study and the city shall accept it. So they can demonstrate what that base density is in any number of ways, including drawing up a second set of plans, like here's how, we're demonstrating how many units would be in our base project. So there's many different ways that an applicant can show how that is. But the key is that with that base density study, the reason why it makes sense to scale down from the proposed, the bonus project, if you will, is that state law requires that those factors be kept consistent. So for example, your average unit size in your base project could not be like exponentially smaller, than your bonus project, right? That would be a issue. So the reason why they need to submit that base density study is to show that, hey, the average unit size is consistent, between the base project and the bonus project.
Got it. And then one more question. In terms of SB 35, does the affordable units provided under state density bonus law count towards what's required under SB 35?
Yeah, SB 35 is just a sort of, it's a ministerial process. It's a streamlining process, and it doesn't dictate, what it is. It just says, as long as it's in Santa Monica's case, we are subject to SB 35 for projects with at least 50% affordable units. It's agnostic about where those affordable units, are coming from or what they're accounting for.
Got it. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Sure, no problem.
Jing, might I suggest that maybe if people are not comfortable coming to the speaker and to the podium to speak in front of everybody, that we're happy to stick around and answer your questions individually.
Of course.
If you're not comfortable going up to the
And
to the
I do want to
podium.
note, I guess just go back to the end slide here. This is our website, but feel free to call or email us. And his first name dot last name at santamonica.gov. So you can contact me, anyone up here, if you have questions. And thanks for reminding me, Rachel, that if you're not comfortable in this forum, of course, we're happy to talk one-on-one.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Mason Arditi. I've been a Santa Monica resident since elementary school, first grade. So I went to Franklin and then Lincoln. Now I'm at Samo High. And I'm the founder of the Youth Entrepreneurship Association. So we have over 100 members at Santa Monica High, and we provide financial literacy and entrepreneurship training, in the real world. So I think Monica, I can say firsthand that we have a lot of members in our school club and our organization that are living in Santa Monica affordable housing. So I would like to see if there's a way to involve the youth and have, us throughout the Youth Entrepreneurship Association have a seat at these tables where, these projects are being discussed and kind of the future landscape of where we are going to be, graduating and living in. I'm 17 years old. I'll be 18 in like 3 weeks. So I'm looking to get involved, in real estate as much as I can in our city. So I'm wondering, is there any way to involve the youth in these discussions? And if so, how can we use it as a real world way to increase the financial literacy among our youth and have them really better suited for an economic future in our city?
Yeah, thank you for being here tonight. I think we always welcome youth participation. It is, I will say, and, bring your friends along in this because the 18 to 35 demographic is a really hard one to come out to these, to come out to these meetings. I think just by being here tonight and being engaged in government and what's happening, at the local government level is so important. And there are many ways, to be involved in the city. You don't have to be, you can volunteer to serve on a board or commission as an example. Come out to any community workshops. We are always looking for citizen volunteers, resident volunteers to serve on, whether it be boards and commissions, participate in any number of city initiatives to garner input. So, I think just being involved and being aware of what's happening, in your city, because like you're saying, you're turning 18 years old, this is your future, and what we're talking about tonight, is going to affect your generation more than any other, right? So.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I appreciate that. I think just kind of like on that note, as far as, not just being involved, but also kind of having like maybe a stake in kind of the developments that are happening. Mm-hmm. So, clearly there's an affordability crisis, where we're, in our community. I'm wondering, is there any sort of potential for a kind of like fractionalized ownership structure where, people kind of like my age or obviously a little bit older when we're getting income could actually have a fiscal stake in the projects that are going on in our community? Is that, a possibility, especially in the chamber here?
Yeah, like the ability to own, right, is what you're talking about. Yeah. I mean, we hear all the time, my kids grew up in here in Santa Monica, they got a job and now they're leaving and they got to go live in, name any other city, in LA County or Southern California. This issue of housing affordability is why the state has actually gotten involved, to the extent that they have, because, in their estimation, there's been kind of decades of non-production, right? And, where supply has been constrained, and demand is high, it's driven up the cost of that housing. This is not my opinion. This is, really kind of where, this stated affordable housing, or just a housing crisis, has manifested itself. And so, this issue of how to make housing more affordable, the state's approach at the moment appears to be build as many housing units as possible because we have decades of production to catch up to it. This conversation around particularly affordable ownership is something that, if you've listened to, some recent city council meetings, it's definitely been a major topic of discussion. And one that, the council has asked us to kind of look seriously at, in terms of what the options are to allow, people like yourself, right, to continue to live in Santa Monica and potentially own, a home and actually remain here. There's a lot of people that would, like to do that, but the fact remains that, we're an 8 square mile city, and, the real estate economics speak to it being really expensive. Land is expensive here. But there are different options, that we're looking at. I think in the city's past history, there was something, you'll hear this term, it's called TORCA. And it's Tenant Ownership Rights Charter Amendment is what it stands for. And what it was a program, that allowed, it was actually a ballot measure. It was by the voters. And it allowed rent control, tenants in rent control units to purchase their property. But what it was that it allowed the landlords to opt to convert those buildings, from apartments to condos, and then it allowed the tenants in them to opt into participating to purchase it, right? And that was a moment in time, and I think I don't want to get into like a huge long discussion about it, but the fact is it was a moment in time and it worked given the variety of state laws that were not in place. You heard me talk about Costa-Hawkins, that has created that challenge because it's allowed all of those units to reset to market. So the financial incentive for owners to opt into a program like that isn't sort of presently there, but in the meantime, because, land is so expensive in the city, therefore it makes, any units that are produced very expensive as well. You look at the, share of units in the city, we have not enough, ownership units. 75%, of Santa Monica is rental housing. And I think that's where we're at now. It's like, what can we do to make that change, but still make it, a place that is accessible, to as many people as possible. And if you know the answer to that, then.
Well, definitely not as qualified as you guys, but if I may offer like a suggestion maybe. So for the kind of like 100% city-run affordable housing projects, right, instead of the 15% where it's run by developers, what if like a small percentage could be allocated for kind of, the youth or like, some sort of educational incentive, whether it's like, general partnership, limited partnership, whatever it is. We have, so many kids that are willing to just go out there and really do what it takes to, just get some experience in the field, right? Mm-hmm. So if we could have kids working just to have like a small 0.2% stake in, an actual Santa Monica project, student who's living in affordable housing and really get them to understand him or her the concepts of what it takes, out in the financial space. Mm. Is that a possibility, especially with the city-run projects that you guys have much more discretion over?
Well, I think as David said, we're the staff. We don't get to make those decisions. That's that would be something that the city council, would have to direct and, decide to go down a road like that. You're correct that when it comes to city land and city projects, we have a lot of discretion, but there are rules around that as well in terms of, who gets a slice of which pie and, whether you can dedicate, a certain percentage of units, for different populations and the like. But, it sounds like you have a lot of ideas, and I would encourage you to continue to be engaged, in government, and local government. And I think sharing your thoughts, with the city council would be, a good place to start, because they ultimately set the policy. We're here to serve the community and to work for the city council. So.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
My name is Mario Washington. I'm a project manager with Community Corporation of Santa Monica. We're a nonprofit development arm. Right when I was getting ready to go, my son just turned 18, so he'll be graduating. And just a little personal, I've worked on the public sector. I also worked on the private sector. Moved here from, New Orleans, so I worked, both sides. But here now working, and my children had the opportunity to be in City Hall, be at a housing authority, be in development spaces. So to your point, what you're asking, I think that was a good question. That's something that, I'll give you one of my cards. You can send me questions, whatever you guys formulate. I'm sure you're going to have your own pathway to here, but, inspiration goes a long way and you never know who's listening. So always ask the question wherever you are. Yours was very thoughtful. because sometimes we're looking for ways to make things happen. We just don't have the outlet to get there. So, and I'm speaking personally. So again, thank you all. Some of you, some things, that I've seen, some projects that I work on, they, of course, they land on because they're the planning department. But, just wanted to say that on the record. And then, for housing, this is a good thing. There's a long way for us to get there as far as affordable housing. We build 100% affordable housing, which means, it's a tougher road to get there. I understand the market rate. I understand the density bonuses. So everyone's trying to put housing out there, and the city, of course, and the state are trying to meet their requirements, but it's a lot of hard work, and you need a lot of people. So the more people that are involved that can assist and move the ball down the field, the better. So thank you guys. Congratulations appreciate it.
Thank you. Great. Are there any other questions or comments?
Just a real quick one.
Of course, yes.
What happens after the 55 years?
The deed restriction, well,
Then everyone who is low income out of Santa Monica?
yeah, so I think if it's part of a market rate project, the deed restriction ends, so it could revert to a market rate unit. In projects where it's 100% affordable housing, that obviously doesn't happen because it's owned by an organization whose purpose and mission is to build affordable housing. But yeah, after 55 years, it could revert to a market rate.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you for attending. And if
Yeah,
you guys
thank you
need
so much.
parking validation, Ross,
Oh, I forgot to mention that, yeah.
Ross is actually outside the door. He's giving away parking validations. So if you guys need that.
Yeah. Please go pick it. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.